What makes a person good? I mean, really, truly good. It's one of those huge questions we've been asking forever. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty challenging sermon from Sun Myung Moon that puts forward one single universal standard for good and evil. And fair warning, it might just flip a lot of what you think you know on its head. So, let me ask you directly. How do you know? What's the ruler you use to measure whether you're being a good person? Just take a second and think about it. What's your go-to answer? Most of us probably land on one of these. We trust that little voice inside, our conscience, or we stick to the laws of the land. Maybe we just go with our gut feeling, what feels right. Or we focus on taking care of our family, our people. These all sound pretty solid, right? Well, here's where the sermon throws its first curveball. It claims that every single one of those standards, our conscience, our laws, our feelings, is fundamentally unreliable. None of them can be the ultimate basis for good and evil. All right, so let's break that down. Let's look at how this sermon takes apart these moral compasses that we tend to rely on, one by one. First up, using me as the standard. The argument here is that we're just not stable enough. Our feelings and our moods change all the time. Happy one day, angry the next. How can that be an absolute measure? And on top of that, let's be honest, we're all naturally wired to be a little self-centered. The sermon uses this really powerful example. Think of criminals in prison who are absolutely convinced they're the victim and society's the bad guy. It's a perfect illustration of how our self-centered view makes it almost impossible to be objective. We just naturally justify our own actions, which makes us pretty unreliable narrators. Okay, but what about our conscience? That has to be reliable, right? Well, the sermon argues that it's totally subjective. What my conscience says is okay, yours might condemn. It says if you have 1,000 people, you'll have 1,000 different consciences. There's just no single true north for everybody. And this critique extends to the law, too. The text compares legal systems, like in communist and democratic countries, and points out that both are basically partisan. One serves the state, the other serves the people. But the bottom line is, they each serve the goals of their own group. So neither one can be the ultimate standard for all of humanity. So this leaves us in a pretty tough spot. If my feelings are fickle, my conscience is subjective, and even my country's laws are biased, what in the world is left? What are we supposed to use to figure out what's good and what's evil? Okay, so after tearing down all those old standards, the sermon builds up a new one. A single, simple principle that's meant to unify everything. And here it is. This is the core of the sermon's answer. Goodness is defined as acting for the benefit of other people. Evil is acting for yourself. That's it. It's not about the result, it's all about the motivation. The why behind what you do is literally everything. I mean, you could perform some great act of charity, but if your motive is just to get praise and feel superior, the sermon says that act isn't good. True goodness is found entirely in the intention to serve something bigger than yourself. The sermon gives a few really clear examples. A nation that just stockpiles wealth for its own benefit eventually becomes what it calls an economic animal, an enemy to the world. But think about a marriage. If both people are focused on serving each other, the relationship flourishes. If they're both just in it for themselves, it's doomed to fall apart. And this all leads to a really bold conclusion. This principle isn't just a nice idea. It's a law of existence. A life lived for others is sustainable, it grows, it creates harmony. But a life lived only for the self, it's fundamentally self-destructive because it just leads to conflict and isolation. But why? Why does goodness have to be defined this way? The sermon doesn't just leave this as a rule to follow, it actually offers a whole theological backstory for it. Okay, so the logic flows in these 4 steps. 1. If living for others is a universal principle, it has to come from somewhere, right? It must have a cause. 2. The sermon calls this first cause God. 3. Therefore, God's own nature must be to live for others. And 4. Humanity was originally created in that image to reflect that selfless nature. So if that's how we started, where did all the selfishness come from? The sermon points to what it calls the fall. This was supposedly the moment in history when humanity flipped its purpose upside down and chose to act for the self. And that one choice, it says, is what created the deep internal conflict we all feel, that battle between our selfless conscience and our selfish desires. And all of this leads to the sermon's ultimate vision. If our core problem is selfishness, then our purpose has to be to reverse it and, step by step, build a world that lives for others.
The call to action here is huge. It's not about doing a good deed every once in a while. It's about completely reorienting every single part of your life, how you work, how you eat, even how you sleep, so that it benefits something larger than just you.
And this vision for a better world is built from the ground up. It starts with one person, an individual who makes the choice to live for others. Those individuals then create good families where everyone serves each other. And those families become the literal building blocks for a peaceful, harmonious world. The sermon concludes with this really incredible idea that a person who truly masters this way of life becomes a conduit for goodness. In the sermon's language, they become a temple of God, a center through which divine goodness can flow out and uplift the entire world. And so we're left with this, an incredibly simple but profoundly challenging standard. It gets rid of feelings, laws, and personal conscience and replaces them with one clear question. Is this action for you or is it for others? It really makes you wonder, if every single person adopted that as their ultimate measure, what would our world actually look like?